When I was 17, I moved to college 2 hours away from home and took residence in the dorms on campus. The dorms were not run through the school, but through a management company. As a result, there were a lot of safety problems: assaults, ODs, drugs, shootings right outside, etc. I am a 100-pound female, so I always watched out for serious situations around me. Everything was great. I had some awful roommates, but I was mostly left alone. One day in September, I was leaving for class early in the morning when I spotted a condom taped to my name tag on the door. It had a note that said, "Call me XOXO," with a random phone number. I told the RAs, and nothing came of it. I just thought it was some random prank pulled by one of the guys on the floor. Things went south with my roommates, mostly because of my night terrors scaring them, even though I warned them before we even agreed to be roommates. So, I was moved into a 2-bedroom dorm with my new roommate Jay. We each had our own room. After a week of living there, I started noticing that things were appearing in the living room while we were sleeping. I asked Jay about it, and she vehemently denied it was her. One day, we noticed that the lock on the front door did not lock properly. If you pulled on the lock and twisted the handle at the same time, the door would come open. Around the same time, I started getting Snapchats of inappropriate things, vague threats, and offers for great sex. I would get ones that said things like, "You look great today," with that specific article of clothing I was wearing. I filed a report to the dorms to get the lock fixed, but it took 4 months, 8 complaints, the threat of legal action, and my friend D yelling at them to get any action. We got our door fixed, but the presence still appeared outside of the door with notes for me. I was still receiving Snapchats, but I moved out of the dorms into an apartment with my then boyfriend. The Snapchats continued. Then I started getting calls at my work. I worked for the dean's office of my college, and I was in charge of answering phones. Every day, I would get 3 or more calls from randomly generated numbers. Discovered it was through apps like Viber and Skype after I reported it to the police and they investigated. I would answer the phone. "Class Dean's office, how may I help you?" I would hear heavy breathing for a few seconds, then they would hang up. I thought it was just some 12-year-old pranking our office until my coworker got a call. She answered with her name, and the person on the line asked if they could speak with me. Thinking it was one of the deans that I had been working with, she forwarded it to my phone. I answered and received the same heavy breathing and hang-up. I reported it to my boss. She did nothing. One of the deans overheard the conversation and reported it to Title IX. Oh boy, talking to them was a mistake. After the meeting with them, the threats started getting worse, and this person found me in my new apartment. One day in December, I was dog-sitting 2 wonderful dogs who hated other dogs and would bark at them on sight. It was around 11 p.m., and I decided to take them out before bed. We got outside, and to the right of me was a bunch of thick trees that were hard to see through. I started to take the girls to the grass on the left. They started growling and barking at something in the trees. Thinking it was another dog, I tried to pull them away, but they would not budge. I glanced over, and out of the trees came a tall man, but the weird thing was, he was wearing a Michael Myers-like mask. He started rushing towards me. The dogs got between me and him. He stopped. I ran up the stairs behind me into the apartment as he disappeared into the trees again. Stupidly, I didn't call the police, but I saw him one more time before I moved to my new apartment. Things were quiet for a while. My boyfriend and I broke up, and I spent the first few days in the new apartment alone. Come to find out, the window that can be accessed from the ground doesn't lock. One morning I woke up. Everything seemed normal. I checked the mirror to do my hair for work. I had a bald spot. My head was shaved in the middle of the night. I found my hair tied up in knots in an envelope. I immediately called the police. They did an investigation, found the window was broken, but couldn't find anything to figure out who it was that came into my apartment. They asked me to compile a list of everything that was missing, and the only thing gone, other than my hair, were 3 pairs of dirty underwear. I have photos of the hair and bald spot, if anyone is interested. The investigation found no one. I have since moved. I no longer answer phones at work, and I keep bear spray next to my bed at all times. I'm a 32-year-old female. This happened to me when I was about 25 or 26. I work full-time as a researcher at a university, which is where these encounters took place. I'm not a professor or anything, and because of my age at the time, I could have easily been mistaken for just another student wandering around campus. On some days, when the weather was nice, I would prefer to spend my lunch hour strolling around the university grounds outside, or sitting underneath a shady tree on a bench, enjoying the time I was not sitting in a cramped corner of a lab. On one of these days, I was sitting on a bench enjoying the fresh air, and a male student walking by asked if he could sit next to me. I'm a pretty shy and awkward kind of person, so even though I would have preferred sitting alone, I said, "Sure." He initiated simple conversation, to which I obliged, but I was careful not to be too forthcoming. He mentioned he had seen which departmental building I came and went from, which slightly alarmed me, given I had never seen this person before in my life. But I pushed the thought from my mind. After all, the weather had been decent lately, and I had spent nearly all my lunch hours for the past week outside. He asked if I was studying within the mentioned department, to which I told him that I was not a student, but rather I worked there. He told me he was an engineering student, and then followed up with asking me out to coffee sometime. I apologized and told him that I had a boyfriend and would have to decline. We parted ways after that, and I assumed I probably wouldn't see him around again. About a week or 2 went by, and I was spending another lunch hour outside on campus, sitting on a different bench somewhere. Seemingly out of nowhere, the same man from before asked if he could sit next to me again. Admittedly, I don't remember what he started talking to me about at first. My mind was reeling, and I was rather uncomfortable having to potentially turn this guy down a second time. Sure enough, he asked me again if we could go out for coffee sometime. I apologized and reminded him that I had a boyfriend and would not be meeting him for coffee. And again, he left after that. I was feeling rather anxious now, but it still hadn't reached a level where I felt I had to be too concerned. A few days later, I had finished work and was leaving the building to walk to where I had parked my car. The university charges a fortune for parking passes, even if you're employed by them. So I had always opted for free street parking about a 10-minute walk away from campus. My walking route would take me down several quiet residential streets with minimal car traffic. Even pedestrian traffic was pretty sparse on the busiest of days. It wasn't until I was about halfway to my car, down one of these quiet back streets, that I noticed someone walking directly across the street from me, but keeping a few paces behind. I noticed him from my peripheral vision and didn't want to flat out turn around to stare at him. It wasn't uncommon to see someone else by any means. I was just always trying to be aware of my surroundings when walking the streets alone. I had to make a few turns coming up anyway, and the chance that they would be going the same way as me was slim. But he did. He made all the turns I did, still walking on the sidewalk across from me, a few steps behind. I still did not want to look at whoever this was. I didn't want him to know that I was aware of what I thought he was doing. I quickened my pace to a speedy walk. I was approaching the first of 2 busier streets before I would reach my car. His pace quickened to keep up with me. That was the moment I panicked. The moment I was sure that he was indeed following me. After that, I started a full-out jog to cross the first of the busier streets. He ran to keep up behind me and was now on the same side of the street I was. I was now nearly at my car. I had to cross the last busy street and get about 100 meters, and I would be there. But it was crossing the street that worried me. I often had to stop and wait a good minute or so before it was clear enough to do so. If this were the case, he would catch up with me. As if the stars aligned, as soon as I made it running to the busy street, I had a gap to cross. I booked it as fast as I could, finally turning around once I had made it, to look and yell at the man who had been pursuing me. It was him. I could have suspected, but now it was confirmed. It was the engineering student whom I had turned down for coffee. "Stop following me!" I yelled at him from across the busy street. "Can I just talk to you?" he yelled back. I didn't even answer him. I mean, the answer should have been obvious from the start, and I was certainly never going to give my time to anyone who had just followed and then chased me for about 1 kilometer. I kept moving quickly to my car, so determined to get the hell out of there that I didn't even care if he saw which car was mine. He had given up following me and never tried to cross the road, to my relief. I got home and broke down. I mean, worse things had happened to other people, no doubt, and I was not harmed, fortunately. But I was shaken. I had some anxieties walking to and from work after that. It wasn't long before a coworker and I would walk most of the distance back to our cars together after work. I even changed where I started parking for a time. A few weeks had passed since the incident, and I had not seen him around campus at all. I had started spending my lunches in the lab instead of outside, but occasionally I would go to the student center to buy lunch instead. This one particular day, the food court in the student center was packed, almost shoulder to shoulder. I was standing in line at a burger stall, and I heard a guy try to get someone's attention through the crowd. I looked up, and it was him again, waving to me and trying to make his way through the people. I panicked, and even though I'm terribly shy, I started a scene and yelled at him to leave me the fuck alone. His face dropped instantly as people stared at us, and he slinked back into the sea of students. My heart was pounding, and I was shaking. I don't even remember if I ended up getting food after that. I went back to work, and from then on, was even more focused on my surroundings than I ever was before. It's been 5 or 6 years since then now, and I still work at the university. I'm so relieved to say I never saw him again after the food court, and haven't had any other harrowing accounts on campus. I'm still diligent about being aware of my surroundings, especially when I have to walk to and from campus alone. I never asked the guy his name, so I couldn't even report an incident to campus police or anything. All in all, I'm just glad I never saw him again, and I can only hope he never did this to any other girl before or after me. In high school, I had a stalker. Here's the story. I'll try to keep it concise, but there's a lot of information for sure. I was 16, and we met on Facebook. He went to a school nearby, and we decided to meet up for a movie. We had a great time together and ended up dating. First time he came to my parents' house, he had an ankle monitor on for house arrest, and wouldn't tell anyone why, and since he was a minor, we couldn't find out. My parents obviously didn't allow us to hang out, so we hung out at his house or around town at the YMCA camp. I was rebellious and naive. Things started to get weird when I noticed his family was pretty odd. One day, we were having sex in his bedroom, and I saw his father looking through the blinds. I screamed and called him out, and his dad ran off. Stalker guy told me that his dad was just into redheads and liked to watch us. I went to leave and his mom was doing crack in the kitchen, so I decided it was time to break up. This is when it got bad. He started crying and told me that he's in cancer treatment, and that's why he needs me. He doesn't have long to live, blah blah blah. I believed him and told him we could be friends. This is when the stalking started. He switched schools to my high school, but never went to class. He would just stand outside of my classroom, looking inside until it was passing period. When I would leave class, he wouldn't address me. He would just follow about 10 to 15 feet behind me to my next period and stand outside the classroom again. I was too intimidated to say something to him. He was 6'4" and a heavy-set guy, so I just let it happen for weeks. It started to progress to where he would follow me home every day. He would get on the same bus as me, despite living across town, and walk 15 feet behind me all the way to my house. He would stand outside, just staring up at the window, until around the time my parents got home, and then he would just leave. Finally, I told him to fuck off and leave me alone. I told him we could no longer be friends or acquaintances and to forget about me. However, that escalated things way further. I started getting about 150 calls a night. Half of them were him screaming death threats and in-detail torture methods that he wanted to do to me, and the other half were him singing me love songs that he wrote on his guitar. Every time I blocked his number, he seemed to just magically get a new one and leave more messages on that. I woke up one day to see that overnight, he had left me one of those dancing and singing snowmen on my porch. He had stabbed it in the head and the knife was still sticking out. He covered it in his liquid deodorant that I had previously mentioned liking the smell of, and I noticed there was a hole where the little song recording device was. When I pressed the hand, it was not the regular Frosty the Snowman song that played. It was his voice, singing eerily, "I'm going to have you forever. I'm never going to let you be." I was done at this point and told my parents, who contacted the school. They suspended him, but he still waited at my bus stop every day and walked to my home with me. One day he ran at me like he was going to tackle me. When I tensed up for the impact, he stopped and hugged me. It wasn't a regular hug. It was like he was trying to crush me. I was 5'1" and about 90 pounds at the time, and he ended up cracking one of my ribs. I cried and he started crying too before running off. He left me a voicemail apologizing in song. This one night is the night I'll never forget, and it's the reason we got a restraining order, and my dad got a gun. I woke up one evening for no reason, just was fully awake. I got up to go to my kitchen to get a glass of water to relax, and in the reflection on my fridge, I saw movement in my backyard. I couldn't see well because it was so dark outside and so light inside, so I went to the back sliding glass door to get a better look. When I got closer, I was met with the silhouette of a 6'4" man standing just outside the door. Stalker guy was in my backyard, under my room at 3 a.m. He was just staring at me. I yelled and my parents got up, but he was gone by the time my dad went outside. There's a patio right outside my bedroom window that goes all the way to the ground, so it's possible he could have been on top of the patio looking directly into my bedroom window before. We got a restraining order granted shortly after that, and Stalker guy dropped out of school. I haven't seen him since in person, but every 6 months, he makes a new Facebook and tries to friend request me. I just block it and report it every time. Scary stuff. Y'all ever heard of that myth that if you wake up in the middle of the night for no reason, there's likely something looking at you? Well, maybe it's true. I don't know what he's doing now or where he went, but I don't care to know. I was born and raised in Texas, but had moved to New York when I was 21. So when I found out at the beginning of a week-long trip that I'd have a couple of overnights in Austin, I was super excited to go to my home state for a few days. My brother lived just north of the city, and we planned to hang out and go to dinner the night I arrived when he got off work. The following day, we were going to meet up with our dad, who lived about an hour away. I got to the hotel downtown, the crew and I checked in, and then we each headed off to our rooms. After a short elevator ride, I got to my room, and not even 5 minutes later, there was a loud, hard knock on the door. It was only around 1 or 2 p.m., and I hadn't called either my dad or brother to let them know I was in town yet, so they wouldn't know what room I was in. I assumed it was maybe one of my crewmates, so I headed to the door. Before even making it to the door, however, a loud male voice on the other side boomed, "The front desk sent me about the bathroom problem you called in," before trying to open the door. "Unlock the door and open up, miss. I need in now." I froze in my tracks. I hadn't even been in the bathroom yet, let alone called anything into the front desk. I'm a petite chick, and while I take no shit from anyone despite my size, I still err on the side of caution. Slowly inching toward the door to look out the peephole, all I could tell was that the man on the other side was at least 6 feet tall and easily over double my weight. No way in hell was I going to unlock the door. I responded to the guy, telling him he must have had the wrong room. He continued pounding on the door while constantly turning the handle, telling me no, he needed in and was getting in the room one way or another. I panicked, but thankfully had the sense to grab the phone and call the front desk. The concierge confirmed that they had neither sent anyone up to my room nor received a call about the bathroom. The entire time, this guy was still determined to get in my room, pounding and yelling. Lucky for me, the front desk had dispatched security to my floor. When the security officers stepped off the elevator a few seconds later, I could hear them in the hall approach and ask the guy who he was, what he was doing, and telling him he needed to leave the hotel. He immediately got hostile and aggressive toward them, and the front desk clerk I was still on the phone with told me the police had been called and were on their way. In the meantime, I was trapped in my room, scared shitless. Long story short, the cops showed up pretty quickly and managed to arrest the guy for trespassing and criminal menacing or some shit. I later found out that the guy was also wanted in connection to a string of break-ins and violent sexual assaults in Austin. He had seen and stalked me from the minute I entered the hotel lobby. Apparently, I was exactly his type of victim. Nothing else happened after that, but it still rattled the fuck out of me for the rest of my stay in that hotel.